Good morning, dear students. Today we will discuss a literary term, poetic justice. We have always heard the famous proverb, the good you do comes back to you, and the evil you do remains with you. Similarly, we have the concept of poetic justice. Poetic justice is an ideal form of justice in which the good characters are rewarded and the bad characters are punished by an ironical twist of fate. So we have certain examples of this in our life. It is what we keep on telling our younger ones. It is one what our grandparents tell us. So in literature also we have the implications of this concept. So it is implicated into literature and all forms of literature to convey moral lessons. So writers they employ poetic justice to conform to moral principles. Ideally, we feel that the principles of morality demand that malicious characters which are in literature they should be punished, and there is some twist in the fate or the event in the circumstances which brings about this punishment, and the characters who are vicious or evil they get punished. Similarly, the characters who have suffered at his hand must be rewarded. So, in most of the works of literature, we will feel this poetic justice. We will observe that the writers they have used the concept of poetic justice in which the malicious characters they are punished and the good characters they get rewarded towards the end. So, we see that the basic purpose behind using poetic justice is to adhere to the universal core of morality where the virtue it triumphs over vice. It manifests the moral principle that virtue deserves a reward and vices earn punishment. So do we feel in our daily life, so do we tell our children that the virtue gets rewarded. So it is a kind of motivation to do good and to refrain from evil. So it is, we can say, that devoted towards the betterment of society in which we hold ourselves, we restrain ourselves, we restrict ourselves from going evil because we know that vice will be punished. And the readers, they will often identify with good characters, and we often feel our mothers and the ladies, they're crying when we watch a movie in which the good character is suffering. So it happens normally. So readers, they will often identify with the good characters. They feel emotionally attached to them and feel for them. So we can say it's a feeling of empathy. We feel for the good characters and we feel for them when they suffer at the hands of the wicked characters. So do happen in our life. Now the definition of poetic justice was given first of all by Thomas Rhymer in 1678. So going to the origin, it dates back to 1678 and it was given in the book The Tragedies of Last Age Considered. So he urged the authors to set more examples to show how good overcomes evil. So this was the first manifestation, or you can say the first example of poetic justice to be found in literature. Naraima, he was a critic and he belonged to the age and he in which the people distressed upon moral education. So it was thought that the role of literature was to provide moral education to the reading populace. So demand of the age is reflected upon his works and he gave the definition, and later on consequently the writers they used this concept. So it was necessary to encourage citizens to be upright in order to reap the rewards. And if we apply it to political, social world, and other fields, economic and financial as well, we can say, it might seem a very philosophical or something mystical, or you can say anti-modern concept. Like in modern concept, we say that the evil flourishes more than the goodness. So it may seem like something that is very theological and mystical concept, but it is justice doled out by mysterious and all powerful force in which we humans are passive and unwitting collaborators with the forces of the universe. So we can also refer to the Victorian age. If we feel that it's an anti modern concept, what happened in the Victorian age when Charles Darwin gave his concept of the origin of species, the faith of humanity was shaken, it was shattered, and the people, they started doubting the existence of God. And then we see all the mm, reflections of that thing into the works of literature of that period, the Victorian period. But the writers then they shifted to diverted to a note of optimism, that if we ground ourselves, if we have faith in God, then all the evils and all the things, they will the things which are, we can say, not good for us, they will come to an end, and ultimately the divine light, it will save the humanity. So it was also again, you can say, referring to the same concept of poetic justice. So while the politics of poetic justice, it has been largely ignored in modern times, but in 17th and 18th century it was used widely, and of course it was a subject of intense debate among literary critics, that whether it should be done, or whether it is, you can say, right to advise the people or guide the people, giving them the concept of poetic justice, or it may seem to be too didactic. So there was an intense debate going among the writers. So there are many defenders who say that poetic justice should be there, it should be used, it should be implemented in literature, because it taught the people the sense of satisfaction and complacency and passivity, that gave the concept its value. So what is the purpose, or you can say what is the need to tell people that the good always gets rewarded? It is because when you feel, when you do good, you feel that you have done something right, and there is a sense of satisfaction that comes into mind. So literature is of course meant for such purpose, in which we feel refreshed and rejuvenated, and it gives a guide and a motivation to do good, and it gives direction to the society, to the human beings, to ponder and think upon the thoughts that are good for the society. There are, of course, a number of critics of the 17th century who were inspired by Plato and Aristotle's comment. So it is only through poetic justice that literature becomes worthy of praise or even mere toleration. So we can see that Plato and Aristotle, they also recommended the use of poetic justice. Now it has been used widely in the famous, and you can say most widely used in the genres of fable and parable, and they come as a wide and good character is rewarded and the bad characters are punished. So we have a lot of fables, like we have panchatantra and parables, in which the good, it ultimately uh, gets something good in turn. So these stories were based upon the idea of morality, which give a sense of ethical values and traditions to the readers, and especially like Panchatantra, it is meant for children. Using the animal fables, the children, they are taught about the morality and ethics. Historically also it was important that poetic justice prevails, and the characters, they do not suddenly change, and they warrant different treatment than what they deserve. Now, if we move to the famous examples, first of all, we have Inferno by Dante. So it's basically a very good example, and you can say a perfect example because it's a long treatise on poetic justice. Dante, he imagines himself as a character who leads through different circles of hell. Inferno, we need no is another name for hell. So he is led through different circles of hell by the poet Virgil. So in each circle, what happens? They come across different famous residents of Florence and Italy, where Dante lived, and they were suffering punishments appropriate to the sins they committed while they were alive. So Dante and Virgil, they saw the hypocrites clothed in rich robes on the outside, and they are led on to the inside to symbolize the deception of these men. So they have given ample examples of how the hypocrites they get punished. So indeed, the concept of people going to heaven while others are sent to hell has a lot to do with poetic justice. Now we come to the famous King Lear by William Shakespeare. So as we know that Lear, he lost his kingdom by the conspiracies of his daughter Gondrel and Regan, who were supported by Edmund. And Cordelia, she is executed in the prison, and Lear dies of grief at his daughter's death. Now, despite all the suffering that good undergoes, the evil is punished. So the good undergoes all the suffering. The king lost his kingdom, and then Cordelia, she also dies. But ultimately, Gonril, she poisons her sister Regan due to jealousy, and later she kills herself when her disloyalty is exposed to Albany. And towards the end, in the climax, Edgar kills Edmund. So the evil gets punished. Now we've come to Dickens, and the example quoted for him is Oliver Twist. So we have the famous character Mr. Bumble. So he was a beadle in the town where Oliver was born, and he was in charge of the orphanage. So he is basically a sadist, and he enjoys torturing poor orphans, and Oliver becomes the victim. Now Bumble, he marries Mrs. Carney for money, and he becomes the master of a workhouse. Now the twist comes. He lost his post as a beadle, and his new wife, she does not allow him to become a master of the workhouse. She beats him, humiliates him, as he himself had done to the poor orphans. Now the poetic justice occurs. Right at the end of the novel, we come to know that Mr. and Mrs. Bumble, they end up being so poor that they live in the same workhouse that they once owned. Now we move on to the next example, that was Sophocles or Oedipus Rex. Now, Oedipus, as we know, he committed the crime of defying gods because he tried to escape the prophecy, he tried to change his fate, but he could not. So he left the kingdom and he went to the new kingdom, Thebes. He killed the king of the city and he married the queen as prophesied. The prophecy turned out to be true, and the man he killed, he was his father, and the lady he married, he was his mother. Now, Greek believed their destinies were predetermined, and it was shaped by gods and goddesses. So nobody can change what is written in the fate or destiny. You see, he tried to change, but he was not successful. So whosoever tried to defy the gods and goddesses, it was considered a sin and it deserved punishment. Now the sin, it gets punished. Now we have another example by Catherine Stockett, The Help. So it takes place in 1960s in states during the civil rights movement. Now here the poetic justice, it combines with humor, where an African American housemaid is unjustly fired from a job. So what she does, she takes the revenge and she bakes a chocolate cake for her ex-employer, who eats it and winds up humiliated. Now, the poetic justice lays in the reversal of racialized power dynamics. So we have a humorous twist of the incident. Another example is by Suzanne Collins' Mockingjay. Now, here, poetic justice is seen when we have the President Snow, who is evil, and he is a ruler and he is a dictator, and he has established the cruel Hunger Games sport. And then what he suffers, he is executed by his own citizen. His usurper, Queen, is also executed so that the chain of oppressive dictatorship is prevented. The main character of the series is Katniss. She is then able to live a peaceful life with her partner and love interest, Peter. Again, moving on to another famous example, that is by Shakespeare, Othello. So we have many characters who experience poetic justice. Like we have Desdemona, who deceives father for Othello, and finally she is killed by Othello. Then we have Iago, the famous villain of literature. Now he is sent to prison because of his evil deeds. Then we have Cassio, the instigator, who was a gentleman. Sorry, Cassio, he is a gentleman. He is appointed as governor. Then we have Macbeth, where we have the murder of King Duncan. And here also it shows that Macbeth, he committed a crime. He murdered King Duncan and his friend Banquo. Then what happens? Macbeth was killed by Macduff, who was a noble supporter of Duncan. And here poetic justice meted out to Macbeth. Now, there is a section of the audience who may sympathize with Macbeth because of the tragic flaw in the character. However, the majority would prefer seeing him pay for his murderous ways and evil ambitions, because the way we uh, experience the soliloquies presented by Shakespeare in Macbeth, we do feel some soft corner for him as well, but ultimately there was a sin and it has to be redeemed. So, this brings us to the end of the explanation of the term. I hope you did understand. All the best. Thank you.